Hello, my name is John Simpson. In this tutorial we are going to be working with Adobe Animate CC to create a navigation system that our user can use to navigate from one part of our movie to another. Let's begin by noting that this tutorial is based heavily upon this book that you see in front of you, the Adobe Animate CC Classroom in a Book. Chapter 8, Creating Interactive Navigation. We are going to be basing a lot of what we do off of that, so think of this as a companion piece for that. We'll begin by looking at what they have provided for us. It's a basic little website kind of thing, restaurant guide, that when we mouse over, we get a little animation that plays in the buttons. When we click, we get a little animation that takes us to the information about said restaurant. We have a little main menu button up here that takes us back to the main menu. And it's very simple, it's very straightforward, and it's all controlled through Actionscript 3.0, which will be the main focus of this tutorial. We're going to begin by creating a new file. So I'm going to go up to File, New, and it's important that we make this an Actionscript 3.0 file, as that's the scripting language we will be using. Go ahead and click OK to that. Once our file's been created, we can modify any of the object properties that we need to, such as the frame rate or the width and height. We're going to go ahead and leave those at the default. And one of the first things to do when starting a new project is always just go in and save it. So I'm going to go to where I'm going to save this, and we'll call this 2018 Nav Tutorial 001, just so that we can save incrementally. Okay, with any large project, I usually begin by creating storyboards, so I'm going to go through those. We start off, this will be our home frame or our home page, if you prefer. This will all reside in frame 1. We will have a simple title banner. We'll have a home button that will return us to this frame. And then we will have 1, 2, 3 buttons that each go to their own content that is stored farther down the timeline in frames 10, 20, and 30. You will notice that I have written the instance name next to each of these buttons. If I want to control them through Actionscript, then I have to give them an instance name. As we go through this, hopefully this will become crystal clear. Each of our buttons will have a small rollover animation in them. So as we learned from the chapter, a button consists of up, over, down, and hit. The up state is what the user sees, and it's going to ride all the way from the up all the way through the hit state. That way the graphical icon that the user sees is the same as the hit area for the button. In the overstate, we're going to have a small nested animation where as they roll over, additional information will fade in. When they click the button, it will play a sound, which we will place in the down frame. And then when it is released, the code that is attached to it will be executed and the user will be taken to the appropriate content. I have laid out the main timeline. We will have 3 main layers at the bottom: background, title, and buttons. Those will go all the way from beginning to end. We will use labels in our code to send our playhead to the home, or content 1, content 2, content 3, as it were. Each set of content will be on its own layer and will exist for a certain amount of frames, such as content 1 exists from 10 to frame 19. When the user releases the button for content 1, the playhead will jump to frame 10 and play where it reaches frame 19. There's an action that simply tells the playhead to stop, and it will display the appropriate content. Here is a diagram of that in a little more detail. The content for number 1 is from frames 10 to 19. The user presses the button, the main playhead jumps to frame 10, plays the alpha fade in for the content, and then there is a stop function, a stop method at the end of that particular time span. The content will be displayed. The user can press the home button to return back to the main menu. I've also written out all of the code. I will explain this in detail as we're writing it for the assignment, but I find that writing it out by hand is a great way to help me remember it. So, as with most projects, I've written out at least the basic code that I will be using for all of this to function properly. Using my storyboards as a guide, the first thing I'm going to do is create the layer structure that is going to hold all of my content on the main timeline. We will go ahead by creating, I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different layers. So I'm going to go ahead and just create all 8 of those layers. Now I'm going to rename them appropriately. And I did not count properly. I need one more layer, and that's going to be my actions layer. Now, actions is a special kind of layer. We don't put anything on there but script. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and lock my actions layer so I don't accidentally put content on that particular layer. The next step in this process is for us to create the content that is going to be displayed to our user. Now for this, I'm simply going to create some very basic placeholder content. The beautiful thing about doing this is I can focus on functionality, and then later on I can return and spruce it up, pretty it up. It's a simple process once I've got it all functional. We will begin by creating some of the more static elements of our production. In this particular case, we'll start with the background. I am simply going to use my rectangle tool to very quickly draw out a rectangle. Use my align tool to match the size, and then align it to the top corner. Now, plain gray is kind of boring, so let's grab our fill, and we're going to change this to a linear gradient. Go ahead and swap over to my gradient transform tool, and just kind of spruce it up a little bit there. I'm going to make that so it's not completely black. Maybe just there we go. I kind of like the way that looks. So I'm not going to do a whole lot with the background, simply going to lock that since it is done. Now for the title, let's go ahead and make something similar. Let's go ahead and this time use our rectangle primitive tool. Very similar type of setup. The thing about the rectangle primitive tool, of course, is we can put those beautiful rounded edges on things. And so I'm just going to set that to an even number. Again, just for the sake of doing it quickly, we're going to make everything just grayscale for the most part. And I would like to go ahead and get rid of that stroke. So, no stroke. Nah, this looks a little cleaner. Okay. Let's put some text on this. I'm going to grab my text tool. I'm going to select everything on that particular layer and turn it into a symbol so that it behaves as a single object. So convert to symbol. This doesn't need to be anything, so we're going to make it a graphic, and we will just simply call this banner underscore graphic. Okay, I think next we should go ahead and create our buttons. So I'm going to do the same process. Let's go ahead and move up to the buttons layer. We're going to lock that titles layer because I don't think I'm putting anything else on there, at least not right now. And so now I'm going to create very simple buttons. We'll start by converting this graphic to a symbol, and we're going to make it a button symbol. We'll just call this, I believe in my storyboards, I called it content 1 button, so we'll just stick with that, content 1 underscore BTN. And if I double click or drill down into that, we can see the structure of the button as was discussed in the chapter and in my storyboards. We have 4 frames, up, over, down, and hit. The mouse responds to the user's input. It displays the up until the user mouses over it. When the user clicks down, it will go to the down state, and the hit area determines where the button activates from. We will begin by creating the layers necessary here. So I do believe I need 3. We will call this BG image / hit area. This one is going to be the over image, and we'll even call this over animation because that's what's going to happen. Animation for left a letter out. There we go. Over animation, because that's what's going to happen in that frame is when we mouse over, we'll have a small animation that plays. And finally, we will have our sound, which is going to appear in frame, the down frame. So very simply, we're going to go to the first layer we created, press F5 to extend our timeline all the way from up through hit. The over animation needs a keyframe in it. It is going to hold the animation itself, so we're going to press F6 to add that keyframe. Again, I'm going to just use some very basic functionality here. I can worry about what it looks like once it's functional. We're going to leave that as it is for right now. And then finally, we'll need a keyframe in the down frame for the sound layer, because I'm going to drop a sound onto there that will play. So, how do we get our sound into Adobe Animate? Lots of different ways. You could go to File, Import to Stage. Another additional way is to simply drag it from the folder that has it into your Adobe Animate file. And so now I have imported that piece of audio. I say that. There we go. Could not import mouse. One or more files was not imported because there was problems reading them. That just simply means that it does not like that particular file. Give me a minute. I'm going to go find another one. Okay, and we're back. I ended up just taking that MP3 and running it through Audition and saving it out as a wave, and now it's fine. So back to what I was doing. I'm going to grab the new WAV file and just drag and drop it into my library. It imports directly in. I can test it to make sure it's going to work by clicking on it and then clicking the little play icon, and I can hear it play. Now, to get this piece of audio to play when we press down on the mouse button is simply a matter of selecting the frame we want it to be on and dragging and dropping. A couple of things we want to make sure that are the correct is, number one, we select that frame. It's playing the right piece of audio, and it is set to event, and it is set to repeat one time. So let's go ahead and test our movie now real quick to see what we've got so far. So I'm going to press Control Enter. We can see as I hover over the mouse, we have a little thing that pops up, and then when I click it, it plays the correct sound. Now currently when I click, we see the stuff disappear. We can fix that simply by extending our timeline out by pressing F5. So we fixed that. Okay. As it stands now, when we do this, that just pops right up. What if we made it so that it faded in kind of slowly? So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to jump over to our Overstate. We are going to grab our black arrow tool. We're going to take this object and convert it to a symbol. We will call this btn underscore over underscore anim. So it's an animation, and it's going to be a movie clip. So we'll call it underscore MC. So button over anim MC. One thing we want to make sure that we do is we do not leave it as a button. We set it up to be a movie clip. We're going to say OK. I'm going to drill down one more time into that timeline. So if we look at this for scene 1, inside the button, inside the movie clip that I just created. And here, this is where it gets a little confusing, but to be able to do an alpha fade on it, I need to set it up so once again it is a movie clip. So convert to symbol, and we will call this we will just call this over anim MC. Very, very quickly, I'm simply over 10 frames. I'm going to make this fade in. So I'm going to use a classic tween for this. So that is a little different than we learned in the books, but they're quick and easy. Simply right click and say create classic tween. Go back to frame number 1. We are going to change our color effect to alpha, and we'll drag that all the way down to 0. So what we get is this will fade in. If I control enter again, I can test this. We got a little bit of a problem. So this is where the first bit of our action script is going to come in. We are going to come back to content. I lied. We're going to stay where we are. We're going to stay in the button over anim MC. I'm going to create a new layer. We'll call this animation, and we'll call this one actions. Again, this is a special kind of layer, so we want to make sure we lock it. We need a very simple action here. I'm going to create a keyframe at the end of the animation to hold that. I press F9 on my keyboard to bring up my actions panel, and I simply type in STOP, open close parentheses, semicolon, and that will stop that from playing more than once. So let's go ahead and minimize that, and let's test this out and see how this looks. Pretty good. Let's put a few finishing touches on it just by adding a little bit of text. Inside the fade in animation, I'm simply going to have it say additional information. To make that font way smaller. Let's go ahead and do this. And again, just make that font a little bit smaller. Let's go ahead to our hit area, our background image, and we're just going to put the name of this button so it's easy for us to find where we are. So content 1 BTN. All right, let's test this one more time just to see how we're coming along. So content 1 button, additional information. Okay, so I was working along and I had a few problems with my naming convention, so I'm going to go ahead and correct that problem now. We need to make sure that our naming makes sense and that we can follow what we're doing. Sometimes it just doesn't work that way. So we are going to begin by renaming these. This is going to be button 1 underscore BTN. Main. So that's the main button itself. If we drill down inside of that, then in our overstate, we are going to have a copy of button 1 over animation, MC, which I want to rename. And I'm going to throw the word main in there as well. Actually, I lied. We're going to leave that the way it is. And we are going to rename this one. We will call this what it is, which is the nested animation. So, sorry for the confusion on that, but it boils down to this is button 1 main underscore button. Inside of that, in frame 2 or my over frame, I have button 1 over nested animation. And then I have the button 1 over animation. Which works out. I do apologize for any confusion that might have caused. Okay, so now that I've got my buttons built, I need to go in and duplicate each of them so that I can add new content to the buttons and have them each function individually. So we'll begin by going to our library. We're going to duplicate our main button. So I'm going to right click to bring that up and say duplicate, and simply I am going to call this button 2 and get rid of the word copy. I'm going to leave it as a button. So let's drill down inside of that. So I can do that by double clicking on it. In my overstate, I have the nested animation, which is currently button 1 over nested. Let's duplicate that symbol. And again, we're simply going to replace the 1 with the 2 and get rid of the word copy. We drill down inside of that. We have 2 more that need to be duplicated because we do have an animation here. I want to be able to maybe change that additional information. So let's start by, first off, duplicating this symbol. So duplicate, there it is. And again, get rid of the word copy, change the 1 to a 2. Now in this frame, instead of duplicating it, what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to swap out for the symbol that I just made. So I currently have this symbol, button 1 over Animate MC selected. I'm going to right click and say swap symbol. And I'm going to select the button 2 over animation. Because when we do any type of tween, we must tween from the same symbol to the same symbol. Let's go back up to our main timeline, and let's bring a copy of button 2 out. Now I'm going to go into content 1, I'm going to drill all the way down, and I'm going to change this just so that we can see that we have different content in each one. Additional information, BTN1. Again, this is all just placeholder content and will be changed when and if it's needed. Go back up here to our top layer. First thing I want to change is the text itself in my button 2, so content 2 button. Go ahead and go back to my black arrow tool. Going to make sure that I am in the correct frame. Drill down inside of this, drill down inside of this. Let's go ahead and move that up. Now, something you'll notice I do an awful lot when I'm working is I'm constantly testing my movie. I want to make sure stuff actually works. Additional information button 1, additional information button 2, and so on. And they both play that sound, so very good. Let's go ahead and do number 3. So we begin by duplicating button number 2. We will call this button 3. Going to go ahead and bring a copy of that out onto the library or onto the stage. Drill down inside that. Let's change our text first off. So this is button 3. I'm going to jump over to my overstate. The first step, of course, is to duplicate this symbol, because if I make changes now, what's going to happen is the content in button number 2 will change because they are based on the same symbol. So by duplicating that, I break the link. Duplicate symbol. Drill down inside that one more time. Let us duplicate the symbol in the first frame. And since I have a good naming convention, this makes sense. Going to go to frame 10, where instead of duplicating, I am going to swap the symbol out. So of course I am going for button 3. I believe it's that one. Yes, very good. So let's test all 3 of these. Let's go ahead and make a change first. And let's test and see if this was correct. So additional information button 1, additional information button 2, additional information button 3. Very good. The very last button that we need to create is going to be our home button. I'm going to make this one a little different. We'll just make it a circle. If I hold shift, I will constrain my proportions and of course create a perfect circle. Let's go ahead and do that. We can just right click this to convert to symbol. This of course is going to be a button symbol. We will call it home_BTN. Okay. drill down inside that. I think as far as my overstate in this particular one, I'm going to make it nice and simple. And we're just going to put everything on the same layer this time. So let's begin by pressing F6 to add a keyframe in the hit area, which again copies frame number 1, the up area, so that the activation is the same as what the user sees. We're going to go to our overstate, press F6. For speed, I am simply going to make it change the gradient. So when you flip over, it will do that. And then finally, I will need to create a new layer to hold the sound. And that is going to be F6 to create a keyframe. We can drag the mouse click out and just drop it directly onto the layer. Let's do an F7 just so that it doesn't play twice. Okay, so we'll call this, say, graphics. And sound. Spound, that's not a word. Rename. Oh, I really need to go get my glasses fixed. There we go. Now, sound. Let's go ahead and drag our home button back over. And it looks like I want to need more layers than I thought I would anyway. So we'll call this text. And using my text tool, I will simply say home. All right. Test and make sure all of my rollovers work. Okay, very nice. Okay, so now that we've got all of our buttons created and our rollovers are functioning properly, I think the next step is for us to create our content. That's going to be pretty simple. We're going to begin by going ahead and extending out our timelines. So by holding Shift and clicking at the top and the bottom, I can select all of those and press F5 to extend my timelines out. We do know from our storyboards that I want content number 1 to go to frame 10, so I want to put a keyframe there, an empty keyframe since I don't have anything in the current keyframe in front of it. Frame 20 for content 2 and frame 30 for content 3. Let's go ahead and do that on the labels as well. You'll remember from the chapter, labels can be used in place of frame numbers. So by selecting the frame, I come over to my properties inspector and I can call these home. And when I do that, you'll notice that the word home appears on the timeline. I'm going to refer back to my storyboards just to make sure that I have got my labels correct. And so we set home. For brevity's sake, C1, content 1. C2 for content 2. And finally, C3, PO, for content 3. Now you'll notice that they line up with the appropriate frames. When I select that, we're in frame 10, frame 20, and frame 30. So let's start by creating our content movie clip. Again, this is just placeholder content, so no judging of the artwork, please. Begin by just drawing it out. That looks pretty good. I am going to use my black arrow tool to select it and then align it with the stage so it's right in the center. Since we're going to be doing this as a fade in and other things, we will be converting it to a symbol. So let's say convert to symbol, and we will call this C1_MC just for brevity. Going to drill down inside of it. Oh, and I made it a button. Now this is a learning moment. because sometimes you will accidentally make the wrong types of symbols, especially if you get in a hurry. So there's two things that I need to do to correct this situation. Number one, go to my library and find the appropriate symbol, in this case C1MC. I'm going to right click it and go to Properties, and then simply tell it it's a movie clip. The other thing I need to do is to select it on the stage and then go up here and change the behavior to movie clip as well in my properties inspector. So now we're good. I can drill down inside and I see that I have my normal timeline. Looking for my text tool. So now I'm going to jump down to my Content 2 area. I'm going to right click that movie clip in the library. I am going to duplicate it. This is, we get rid of the word copy. We change this to C2 underscore MC, so content number 2. We can come up here, drag it onto the timeline. Of course, what's the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to drill down inside here. I'm going to change that text box so that it reads content 2. Go ahead and go back to scene 1. Again, let's duplicate the movie clip. In this case, we'll be duplicating content number 2. Content number 3 underscore MC. Go to the appropriate frame, frame 30, C3 label. Drag out C3. And change that to number 3. All right. If I were to test the movie now, it would not function properly. I need some basic ActionScript here. But before we get to that, let's go ahead and build the animation of our content fading in. Now this is just a little touch. Having things pop in is perfectly acceptable, but since we have the ability to make things fade, we should. Very simply, again, I'm going to use a classic tween. I'm going to go, in this particular case for content number 1, I'm going to go to frame 19 and press F6. Between the two keyframes that I have on content 1 layer, I right click and say create motion to, oops, I did that incorrect. Let's remove that motion tween and create classic tween. Go back to frame number 1. I'm sorry, it'd be frame number 10. Going to grab the symbol on the stage and we are going to change the alpha. So over the course of frames 10 to 19, content 1 is going to fade in. Now let's do that for the other two as well. So frame 29, F6 to add a keyframe, right click between the two, create classic keyframe, go back to frame 20, select content number 2 on the timeline, change the alpha. So it will fade in. And one more time. We are going to do the exact same thing here. Frame 39, F6, right click, create classic tween. Go ahead and select number 3 there on the stage, change the alpha. My word content moves. Oh, I see what happened. Okay, so time to do some cleanup. I'm going to jump in here. I apparently did not put the appropriate space in. And then we'll see that we have a little bit of a problem, like when we jump to frame 30, we see the word content 2 as content 3 fades in, and we don't want that. Simple fix. Simply go to, in content number 1 layer, go to frame 20 and press F7. On content number 2 layer, go to frame 30 and press F7. That's going to put in a blank keyframe, make everything on that layer disappear. And just for consistency's sake, let's go ahead and put one at the end right there. So again, now, since we built those animations, I'm going to go ahead and play this, but without any action script. The playhead is going to loop through the main timeline very, very rapidly, and it's not going to look very good. But that's okay, that's why we're learning to script. The next step is for us to write all of the action script required to make our stuff work. Now, the first step in writing our script is to make sure that all of our buttons that are going to be scripted have instance names. An instance name is different from the name we've given it in the library. It is a name that we give it to it once it's on the stage, and we apply the instance name by selecting the instance and then going to our properties inspector, and there we can go ahead and give it the correct instance name. There are some basic rules about naming your instances. The chapter went over them, but it's basically do not start it with a number, try not to start it with a capital, do not put spaces or funky characters into it. In this particular case, ours is going to be nice and simple. I'm going to call it content1_btn. For the second one, I bet we can guess it's going to be content2_btn. Content3 btn, and then finally home_btn. Once I've done that, we're going to begin by writing the script that goes into frame number 1. So on my actions layer, I'm going to select the first frame, and I'm going to press the F9 key. The script pane has a lot of different tools. For our purposes, I am going to hand type all the script. It's just easier for me. There are scripts, code snippets as they're called, but I just find it easier to type in the code myself. I will comment this code so that as you're looking at it, it makes sense. So we'll begin by stopping our main timeline in frame number 1. So I'm going to use the 2 hash marks to create my comment. So stop the main timeline. And then the code itself is very simply stop, open close parentheses, semicolon. As that is a method. I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of all the different terminology at this point. That comes with practice. So if I were to hit play now, very simply, it's just going to sit and not do much of anything, which is great because I told it to stop in frame 1. So now let's write the listener for the button. So generically, when we want something to listen to a command, we write it like instance name dot add event listener. There are different types of events that we can listen for. In this particular case, we're listening for a mouse event. And what a mouse event are we listening for? Well, we're listening for a click. And then we give it the name of the function that we want to execute. We close that off with a closing parentheses and then a semicolon. So to see that in action, it would go something like content1_btn, that's the instance name for my button, dot add event listener. Notice how that the word has changed color, changed to a blue. The reason for that is because that's a reserved keyword inside of Actionscript. I'm going to come to my settings real quick, go to Edit, preferences, I'm just going to make that text a little bigger. So maybe it'll be a little bit easier to read as I write it. So content 1 underscore btn dot add event listener. What are we adding? Well, we're going to be listening for a mouse event. What mouse event? Click. And then we want this to call a particular function. In this case, we're going to call it content 1. I'll put a semicolon at the end. And I believe that is correct. Check my notes just to make sure. All right, so now that I have told the button to listen, I need to create the actual function that is going to work along with this. So we're going to say function. Again, it turned purple because it is a keyword. This is how we create our function. A function is a block of reusable code. In this particular case, we say function, and then we're going to say the function name. So in this, we're going to say content 1. We say E semicolon, or I'm sorry, colon, mouse event. It won't be returning any information, so we are going to say void. And then we will have our opening brackets along with our closing brackets. Now, this is going to go ahead and add the closing bracket for me, so when I open it and I press return, it'll automatically add the closing bracket. The book had us jump right into using the timeline controls. I always like to include a trace statement. Now, a trace statement is just an output. It is going to output certain information whenever I click the button. So this one is going to say hello world. Actually, I lied. Let's keep things consistent, and we'll say content 1. Now, I put that within quotes because that is a string, and if I wanted to read out the word content 1, it has to be within quotes. We'll go ahead and do a quick semicolon at the end of the line. Press Control Enter, and let's see what happens when I press content 1. I get from the output window, I get content 1. Very good. That means things are working the way they're supposed to. Let's go ahead and write this for the rest of our buttons. Now, I like to keep things neat and orderly. So, adds event listeners for our buttons. I'm going to go ahead and do that for all of my buttons. These lines are going to create the functions. Again, lots of copy and pasting, but I'm doing that primarily for speed. So we have function content 2, and we want it to trace out something different so that we know. Let's go ahead and say content 3. And last but not least, trace out. How about something fun this time? How about dilly, I'm home. Okay, so again, I want to stress the trace doesn't actually do anything except output information to let us know that we have wired things properly. So let's go ahead and command return to test this. And we have a little problem. We are not stopping. So whenever you do get an error, it will always pop up. It will say scene 1, layer actions, frame 1, line 7, column 1, 1120 access of undefined property, content 2 underscore BTN. So what that's basically saying is I am trying to add an event listener to something that doesn't exist. So let me go double check, and I can tell you right now where the error is. It is probably in my instance name. Looky there. I don't have an instance name. Actually, we're got the wrong object selected. Contnet. See, C-O-N-T-N-E-T. So you need to make sure that you're typing what you think you're typing. All right, so let's see if that has taken care of my issue by pressing Control Return again, and voila, everything is stopped. Content 1, Content 2, Content 3, and finally, dilly dilly, I'm home. Very good. All of my buttons are functioning the way they should. Now we need to have them actually do what they're supposed to do. So back to frame number 1 that has my actions in it. Press F9 to bring up my actions. We are simply going to say go to and play. And since I've put labels down, let's go ahead and put the labels on there. So C1. So go to and play C1. Control V, go to and play C2. Control V, C3. And then finally, we're going to type something different. Go to and stop. Home. And I really should add my semicolons at the end of each of these lines. Let's go ahead and Control Test to enter, or Control Enter to test, I should say. Okay. We still have some errors, but it does appear to be doing what I want it to do. And then I've got another error, but that's fine. I think the reason being is I probably, I capitalized home, but I did not capitalize it in my code. So again, make sure that what you're typing in your code matches what you've done other places. Capital H. All right, the very last thing we need to do, because what is happening when we say go to and play C1, it goes to frame 10, and then it just plays all the way through. We need a way to tell it to stop at the end of each of those animations. So we are very simply going to go to our actions layer, press F6, STOP, open close parentheses, semicolon. Go here. F6 for keyframe again, that is frame 29. STOP, open close parentheses, semicolon. And then finally, at frame 39, another keyframe. Okay. Content number 1. Press the home button to return home. Content number 2. and content number 3. So while it's plain and not the most visually appealing thing in the world, it does function properly, which is, in this case, more important than it being visually appealing. I could now go in and begin to edit my movie clips and change things, change my text to an appropriate manner, and there you go. I hope that was useful, and I hope it has helped your gentle introduction to ActionScript 3.0. All right, we'll see you next time.